I think this is pretty typical, but a lot of people have this underlying feeling that they're destined for more than what they are currently doing. Mm-hmm. And there's just something they're missing that is the missing piece to solving that equation to set them on the right path. And I always felt like that piece was missing in my life to really guide me forward on what I actually should be doing. Maybe that's not as common as I think, but I feel like a lot of people
I think that's the voice that calls people out of the safety of their father's tent into the world, right? If you pay attention to it, that's the voice of adventure. That's what people used to call a calling, right? And it's a very strange thing because a calling has it's like an independent spirit, because you have to act in cooperation with it. It's like an agreement. It's like a covenant. That's how it used to be described. That's how it's described biblically. Something calls to you, and you don't exactly get to pick what that is. Like, you can say no, you can avoid it, you can take a different path, but it isn't obvious to me at all that what interests us is within our control. And that's a very strange thing, right? Because it indicates that there's something like an autonomy that's operating in what calls us. You can think the same way about conscience. You know, things you do that you might want to do will still bother you. And you might think, well, if your conscience is you, then why can't you just tell it what to tell you and end of problem? And, well, part of the answer is it wouldn't be much of a conscience if that was the case, but even more fundamentally, that points to the operation of something that's independent within your psychological landscape. So one of the things you see in traditional stories is the interplay of two things that guide people forward. There's calling, and so that's the voice that you just described. So in the story of Abraham, for example, the biblical story of Abraham's about 75 when the story opens, and he's from a very wealthy and privileged background. And he has no reason to do anything because everything that he could have is already at his hand. And a voice comes to him and says, you have to leave all this. You have to go out into the world and have your adventure. You have to get beyond your infantile security and dependence, even if it's providing for you, everything you might need out into the world. And he follows that voice, and it leads him into all sorts of catastrophe. Like, it's not a story without its ups and downs after that. It's not an uphill trek towards ever increasing paradises, right? It's war and famine and starvation, or war and famine and betrayal and the necessity of sacrifice, all the things that are terrible about life. So that voice that you said, or that sense that you had when you were a kid, I think that's in every kid that hasn't had it thrashed out of them through one means or another, tyrannical father or over intrusive mother. Those are the most common crushing elements, let's say.